Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Continuamos con las actividades en el marco del primer Festival Internacional de la Facultad de Contaduría y Administración. Modera esta conferencia la maestra Brigitte Aide Treviño Hernández, coordinadora de diplomados presenciales y seminarios. Adelante, maestra.
Hello, everyone. We are pleased to welcome you to our conference, Economic Structure and Sustainability of Iceland, given by Mr. Haflidy Siverson, Project Manager of the International Office at University of Iceland, Hashkoli Island. Before starting, I'd like to share his background with you guys. Mr. Haflidy Siverson is currently working in the education sector, facilitating student exchanges with countries in America, Asia, and Oceania. Education and professional career dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge of economics and international affairs, particularly in relation to China, environmental economics, and the political economy of states. His experience in diplomacy and banking has mostly been grounded in fundamental research used as foundation for cross-border M&A deals and trade negotiation. He's planning to develop his leadership skills with the realm of international relations to move on to management of multilateral projects for the environment, particularly in the fields of renewable energy, wastewater management, and fisheries. He holds the following specialties: drafting research reports, government liaison and negotiation, M&A, and economic analysis. Having said that, Mr. Siverson, the mic is all yours, so please go ahead.
Thank you for everyone who was able to join us today. I'm going to share some slides. One second. Okay, I'm gonna have to do it one second. It's we shared the slides just before and there was no problem, but now when I open them I cannot see them. I'm gonna see if I can do it like this. One second. Okay, do you see my slides?
No.
Okay. I'll try again. Okay, what about now?
Yeah, it's okay, thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the Icelandic economy and the structure of the Icelandic economy for you today. And what I think is particularly interesting for student of business and economics in Mexico when looking at the Icelandic economy is that you guys come from a very large economy in a large country with many different industries and many different economic actors and both economic and social problems and a lot of resources and things like this. So you have all of these different variables that influence your economy, and it's kind of difficult to get an overview. But what's wonderful about the Icelandic economy is that we only have few of these variables. So we only have a few major industries. We have a few economic problems that are very visible and very easy to understand. So I hope in the next half an hour or so to be able to give you sort of an overview where you can understand almost the whole economic system in half an hour, and hopefully use that understanding to apply to more complex economic systems when you study them in the future. So I would first like to thank the Icelandic Confederation of Industry for sharing this recently updated slide package with me, or the Confederation of Icelandic Enterprise. And so if you have any questions, I think the best format would be just to put them in the chat. I probably will not be able to answer them while I'm presenting, but we can do it afterwards. Here you see, if we start with the politics, so here you see the different coalitions of government that we've had in Iceland in the last 30 years. And as you may know, many European countries, especially countries in Western and Northern Europe, they rely on coalition governments. So what happens is that people vote parties into the parliament, and once the elections are complete, the different parties have to talk to one another in order to form a coalition that can vote for the majority in parliament. And I don't want to go into depth with all of the names and all of the names of the parties here, but you see the blue Ds there. That is the dominant party in Icelandic politics, and it is called the Independence Party. And it is the traditional right-wing party of Icelandic politics, maybe a little bit similar to the Republican Party in the US, even though in Iceland we always say that this blue Independence Party is to the left of the Democratic Party in the US. So Iceland, just like most European countries, is much further to the left of traditional US politics. But you see that they have been a part of almost every coalition government since 1991. But there's two governments that I wanted to point out to you. And this is very important in a historical context and because of economic challenges and problems. So that is the government from 2007 to 2009. So this is the government that collapsed during the financial crisis. So you may remember the financial crisis of September 2008 was started when first Bear Stearns, an investment bank in the US, and later Lehman Brothers got into a lot of trouble, and the US government allowed the Lehman Brothers to dissolve. But that sort of didn't really start the economic crisis, because that was kind of kept under control in the USA. But then what was happening in Iceland was that there were these Icelandic investment banks who were collecting saving deposits from European savers, mostly in the UK, but also in the Netherlands and in Germany and different countries of Europe, because they had become so big in the Icelandic economy that they needed external funding, and they found that this was the easiest way to just collect deposits abroad. So there was lacking regulation in Europe at the time, and I believe that the size of the Icelandic banks had come to be 14 times the size of the Icelandic economy. So if you think of the government as a lender of last resort for a bank, then the Icelandic banking system was already 14 times bigger than the government. So the lender of last resort, of course, couldn't support the banking system. So when there was an Icelandic bank that couldn't pay out the deposits in the UK anymore, then the whole Icelandic banking system collapsed in 2 days, and the Icelandic government basically had to close off all financial flows in and outside of the country, because basically the bank and the government were both bankrupt. But in order to just try and stabilize the situation domestically, they just had to cut the country off from the rest of the world. And that's the government that was there in power 2007 to 2009. And that's the only time in, I would probably say, in the last 50 years that you see a left-wing government. So there's no blue for the next two. And then the other government I want to point out to you is the 2013 to 2016. There was another economic problem, another social challenge that led to the end of that government. So we have 4-year terms, but they only lasted 3 years and 8 months. And that was because of the Panama Papers. So as you may remember, there was a law office in Panama. Somebody managed to break into their hard drive, pull out all of these papers that implicated politicians, including Vladimir Putin of Russia, that implicated politicians with hiding money in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and in the British Virgin Islands and in Tortola in the Caribbean next to Mexico. So this government fell apart because the prime minister of that government and the minister of finance in that government, they were both found to be hiding money outside of the country. So you can, even though you guys know nothing or very little about Icelandic politics, you can see from there it's always this blue right-wing governments that have been in power, but these major economic disasters of recent years have kind of led to this switch. And I'm sure you can connect with something that has happened in Mexico to political leaders that have been implicated during the global financial crisis or the Panama Papers in the last 20 years. Now, so we are having elections here actually tomorrow. So the current government is coming up, coming to the end of its 4-year term. So that is a coalition. That's like a coalition that spans the whole spectrum. This traditional right-wing party, also the left Greens, and then the Progressive Party, which is kind of a farmers' party in the center. And the latest exit polls, they suggest that they need one more person in parliament in order to keep their majority. So it's going to be a very exciting election, and people are predicting that we're not going to have a result until very late tomorrow night, maybe even in Sunday morning. But I'm not going to bore you more with Icelandic politics. So if we just go into the Icelandic economy, of course it's a tiny economy, and it's a small open economy, which is about 0.5% of that of Germany, and it renders Iceland the smallest among OECD countries. However, in terms of GDP per capita, Iceland ranks 7 within the OECD. And over the last, let's say, sort of after the recovery after the financial crisis in 2008, and really sort of after 2016, 2018, Icelandic GDP per person has been very, very high. So it's been ranking up there with Norway, with the Norways and the Switzerland and the Luxembourgs of this world. Even though we don't have as sophisticated an economy as those countries, but it's just basically because we have such few people and we have such plentiful natural resources that we're able to achieve such high national incomes. And I believe you see Mexico there on the list, unfortunately at the bottom. But of course, Mexico is a developing economy with a huge population. So I believe that Mexico is gradually rising up that list. But here you also see sort of comparisons if you take the Nordic countries. So you know, the difference between Scandinavia and the Nordic countries is that Scandinavia is Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and then if you add Finland and Iceland, then you have the Nordic countries, not just Scandinavia. And this is the comparison. If you just see the cakes, Iceland is just so small compared to them. But we always compare ourselves to them. So we don't compare ourselves to Mexico. We don't compare ourselves to New Zealand or Germany. We compare ourselves with the other Nordic countries because they have managed to achieve standard of living and a quality of life that we are trying to achieve constantly, and we are pretty much there right now. So the high standard of living here is reflected in high wages. So wages in Iceland are very high in international comparison, with both minimum and average wages score in top 4 among OECD countries, even after taking into account a relative high price level. So you see there that basically the sort of the perennial economic question facing employers and facing the government in Iceland is the power of the labor unions, which are able to negotiate very, very high wages, which does not make Iceland very competitive when it comes to foreign direct investment. However, when you have a very participatory democracy, and like, for example, these elections that we're having tomorrow, where there are almost 10 political parties who have a good chance of getting people into the parliament, then of course you kind of have a society where almost each salary worker is in essence so important that it's perhaps not surprising that the salaries are so high here. But we'll understand later that prices here are also some of the highest in Europe. So this salary doesn't really like help too much all the time. Now, if we go to what I started off with in terms of how you can have a country where you can kind of try and understand the economy completely because it has such few industries, I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about that. So Iceland was settled in around 894 and was basically the poorest country in Europe up until the Second World War. After the Second World War, we were basically the richest country in Europe. And what happened is that we stayed out, we were outside of the fighting that happened in Europe that destroyed so many national economies in Europe. And we basically exported everything we could export at the time, and our fishing industry became very important, and we used all of our boats to support the UK economy in their struggle against Nazi Germany. So while all of the other European countries were having their cities bombed and they were losing their soldiers, we were just shipping in import revenues all the time. So traditionally, the most important industry is the fisheries. So because we are an island in the middle of the Atlantic, we are basically able to keep a 200-mile coastline where we have almost exclusive control over these fishing resources. These are also some of the most bountiful resources in the world. So we can basically fish a lot from there and export. And back in the past, because before you had freezer technology and container technology, what we would do here is that we would take a giant cod and make it into bacalao. And I believe that's a very important part of the cuisine in Southern Europe, and you probably know it well in Mexico as well. But this is traditionally our product that basically built this whole economy that's so sustainable now. And I like to always make fun of it that in Portugal, you know, if you have bacalao, which is, I think, their Christmas food, sometimes the price of Icelandic one is twice the price of the Norwegian one, even though there's no difference. It's just in the heads of the Portuguese that they prefer the Icelandic bacalao. The second industry that's very important is geothermal and hydroelectric. So because we are so far north, we have a few glaciers that retain a lot of water, and also because we are a volcanic island, the soil in our country is very porous. So basically, we are just like a sponge for water. And then we get like the cold water from the sky, and we get the hot water from the earth. From the earth, and this creates these big glacial rivers that we then put hydroelectric dams into. And I believe that along with Norway, we are the only country in the world that has electric production. Domestic electric production is more than 95% from renewable resources. And then we also have the geothermal, which we use to heat up our houses, because of course it gets cold here in winter. So it's just we're incredibly lucky with the sort of the energy resources that we get from nature. And this also creates a lot of surplus electricity. And so it has been quite popular to build sort of high aluminium plants here. So basically what we have is fish, energy, and aluminium. And this was until the financial crisis in 2008, because then we kind of became a semi-poor country again, and we couldn't really. Before the financial crisis, banking had become the major industry in this country, and was the first industry actually to overtake the fisheries as the main industry. But then banking disappeared, so we had to find something else. And I was working for the government at the time, and I knew what was the answer, and so many other people did, and that was tourism. It's because if you have glaciers, if you have hot springs that in some places even like blow up into the sky, this is something that tourists like to see. And then we're also ideally located between North America and Europe. So I always refer to the Icelandic Airlines as having a spider business model. So they fly all the people in from 20 different locations in Europe. They meet in the middle in Iceland, and then they take them from 20 different locations in North America, like this. So everybody comes together in the middle of the spider. And it would be wonderful to see Aeromexico fly to Iceland one day and bring our friends from Mexico to Iceland and in Europe and back. So these are just our industries. And you can just look into the input from each industry into the national economy, and then basically just divide it by the population and see how this high standard of GDP per capita is achieved. So us being a small island with basically only with fish and water, we are heavily reliant on foreign trade. And since many products and services are not produced domestically, they need to be imported. A strong export sector is essential to fund this import, and international trade thus plays a fundamental role in Iceland's economy. And here's one interesting observation that you guys can know about Europe, but for many countries in Europe, Netherlands will be the top export destination. It is not because the goods get consumed in the Netherlands, it's because in the Netherlands they have a city called Rotterdam, and Rotterdam is the biggest import hub in Europe. So all of the goods that come from Mexico or US or from China, most of them will go through the Netherlands. That's why Netherlands is our top import destination. And then you see your old colonial power is our second biggest export destination. And you already know why. It's called bacalhau. So we export a lot of our seafood to Spain and to the UK, just like we did in the Second World War. So you can basically, the story that I've been telling you of the Icelandic economy, you can confirm it with this export destination that you see on this diagram. And then there's where did the imports come from last year? So Germany and Norway. So for Norway, that would be the import for our aluminium industry. And then you have China. So in 2014, we finalized a free trade agreement with China. We were the first country in Europe to do so. We were also the first country to recognize China as a full market economy in relation to their admission to the WTO. So we get a lot of imports from there. And it's quite interesting to be the sort of first free trade partner of China in Europe. And it's kind of maybe even surprising that they're not a bigger import partner for us. But the main reason for that is that we don't have any direct transportation links with China. So there's no direct sale, there's no direct shipping, there's no direct flying. Of course, there's no direct trains because there are no trains that come to Iceland and there are no trains in Iceland. So we don't import more from them than that. We would probably import more from Mexico if we had direct flights and direct shipping with Mexico. Here's another statistic as well. Exports and imports are like a 69% share of the Icelandic GDP. So as I've explained already, Iceland lacks diversification in exports. However, diversification has increased in the past 100 years with the addition of tourism and aluminum sectors. The IP industry and pharmaceuticals show promise for future growth, yet Iceland remains the least diversified country within the OECD. So here again, we get another interesting Iceland-Mexico comparison. So here it's the closer your value is to 1, the least diversified you are. And while Iceland is there at the top as being the least diversified, which is of course not good, because then we put ourselves into situations like we had in 2008 during the financial crisis. While Mexico is there over Denmark, which I think is actually not a good sign, because Mexico should at least try and achieve export diversification greater than Denmark. But of course, Denmark is an old trading powerhouse, and they have a lot of high-tech industry and things like this. And then also to connect with the story of the Icelandic economy that I told you before, you can see here how the on the bar diagram, how in 19 it was basically just 2 export industries, fisheries and agriculture. And then if we go to the year 2000, fisheries have become 41%, and tourism is slightly increasing. And then the dark blue, you would take that as services and others. And in 2000, then the financial industry was already taking off. Another interesting thing about Iceland, and something that you will recognize in Mexico as well, and that you will understand from my introduction about the Icelandic politics and how I explained to you how we've had change in government in relation to economic financial crises in 2008, and then the Panama Papers in 2016, is that we have significant business cycle fluctuations. As a small open economy, Iceland tends to be more volatile than other larger economies. Also because of this we lack the export diversification. The latest period of economic growth is one of the longest in Icelandic history, a total of 9 years. So it'd be like 9 years only, halted by the pandemic. So another economic crisis that has kind of knocked on people's doors. The economy contracted by 6.6% in 2020, but is expected to grow by 3% on average between 2021 and 2026. And here, this brings me to another important observation about the Icelandic economy, and because I also study the Chinese economy quite a lot. It's this like, how high is the percentage number of economic growth in the Icelandic economy, or how high is it in China? Because for those of you who know a thing or two about China, is that from about the year 2002 until the COVID pandemic in 2020, the country was basically growing at an average of 10%, which is enormous for a country of that size. Countries in Europe or even the USA, they tend to grow by 0 to maximum 2%. But in Iceland, because we are such a volatile economy, that we often have economic growth of maybe 3 or 4%, and we are being predicted 3% between 21 and 26, and the Chinese economy has actually come below 3%, so which is quite remarkable. I don't know what the numbers are for Mexico, but if I remember correctly, then Mexico also has this. It can the economy can contract and it can actually grow by quite a high percentage at each time. But what's really remarkable about this diagram is how you see the economic growth functions and how short our periods of growth are. And I just want to explain to you, since you're students of business and economics and accounting and administration, is that what we have here in Iceland is probably a similar problem that you have in Mexico, is that we have our own currency. So back in the day when the fishing industry was the most important industry, if the salaries were becoming too high, then the fishing companies would have to be paying such a large share of their income to their employees, while they wouldn't be earning enough money through the export. What the government would do, they would deliberately push down the currency or even officially devalue the currency, so people's salaries would go down and the import income from the fisheries would go up. And we still live with this system. So when COVID hit, our currency went down by 20% in less than a month. When the financial crisis hit, our currency went down by about 50% in a couple of months. So this is one of the keys to the short economic cycle, is that it's very easy for the government and it's very easy for the biggest corporations in this country to have the local currency in order to adjust the money mechanism when we have an outside pressure such as an economic crisis. And I'm sure you have similar issues with the Mexican pesos, even though your economy is so much more complicated and it's more difficult for you to react. So there have been unprecedented times socially and economically. The second quarter of 2020 brought the largest quarterly GDP contraction ever measured in Iceland. That's even more than 2008. That's quite surprising. The economic impact of the pandemic and social distancing was most notable in foreign trade. GDP contracted by 6.6% in 2020 and substantially less than the 8% which had been expected. And here you see here you see what I was kind of trying to get at as well. You can see, basically just see what our economy consists of, even though these are changes. But you can imagine, like, if you add up these changes in order to create this minus 6.6% in the contraction of GDP, our exports went down by 30.5, and this would have been largely in the fishing industry, and this would have been largely because of just the decrease in shipping and the decrease in people in Europe being able to go to the supermarket to buy fresh seafood because they were in lockdown because of COVID. Investment went down by 6.8%. Local consumption went only down by 3.3% because we had to continue buying stuff ourselves. And of course, the government spending went up by 3.1%. So you can really kind of, I hope you're starting to see how a shock such as COVID, you can almost just read the influence it has on these few economic inputs that we have in our economy. So these were unprecedented times socially and economically. This crisis is different from past economic turmoil. Inflation unusually low, while unemployment remains at historically high levels. So here's another interesting observation about Iceland, is the unemployment rate. Before the crisis in 2008, the unemployment rate was usually about 0.4, 0.5%. This is considered unsustainable in any other economic system in the world. Just in order to deal with like seasonal or frictional unemployment, an unemployment rate of about 1.5 to 2% is considered normal. But in Iceland, because we're a small island economy where everybody works, and you know, I started working in construction work when I was 14. We have a history of incredibly low unemployment rates. But COVID changed all of that because, like I said, before 2008, we had energy. So let's say aluminium, energy, and water. That's one industry, and let's just call it energy. And we had fisheries and we had banking. Banking disappeared, and we got tourism instead of banking. And what happened to tourism in COVID? Of course, it collapsed around the world. So here you see in the middle diagram, you see how the green line, how it went up. Sorry, I'm having to push away some questions and things. Whoop. Yeah, and the inflation rate went down. So why did the inflation rate go down during COVID? Well, because COVID was keeping economic activity down. So even though the shops were having a tougher time, they couldn't increase their prices because they had to depend on people still being able to buy their goods when people were losing their jobs, etc. So now we have an unemployment rate at around 6-7%, and that's something that's very difficult in this economy. So Iceland was severely hit by COVID due to the importance of tourism. Tourism grew fast after the global financial crisis and made up 42% of Icelandic exports at its peak in 2017. However, following COVID-19, tourism share of exports shrank to 12%. So that's your main industry is going from 42 to 12% within a year. Yet the economic impact of the pandemic is still less than might be expected with regards to reliance on tourism. So our tourism is coming back, and I refer back to the spider model of Iceland there. We are able to bring in the gringos, or the US tourists. So because the US people and many of the mainland Europeans, they really want to travel, and now we have a decent COVID situation, the tourism is all coming back really fast because it's kind of safer to visit Iceland than so many other countries. So here you see a comparison of the economic cost of COVID-19 as compared to the tourism as a share of GDP. And what countries do we see at the three top? It's Iceland, Greece, and Mexico. Even out of those three, Mexico is the only country that's below the curve on this on this diagram, which is compiled by the IMF with numbers from the IMF, World Travel and Tourism Council, etc. So obviously Mexico is doing really well in terms of tourism, despite the economic cost of COVID. So brighter prospects, but hinge on fragile assumption. So removing possible barriers to foreign direct investment and trade help to increase growth and facilitates job creation. Simplifying the tax code and alleviating burdens and regulation will be a priority. So as you can see, we have just gone through a downturn in our economy, and we foresee an economic growth hitting as high as 6% in next year, and then 4.3 the year after. And I would assume, given Mexico's dependence on tourism, it's going to be something similar. So it'll be interesting to hear your teachers tell us about that afterwards. And we're also, even though our inflation has only been at about 3.3% or is expected to be 3.3% this year, we're also going to see that go down. Now, remember before I said inflation didn't jump through the roof during COVID in Iceland? For us, 3.3 is considered normal, yet again, because we're such a small dynamic economy. And unemployment was coming down from 8 to 6.9 to 6 over the next 3 years. So this is an average of predictions made by different Icelandic banks. So we have very good analytical departments in the bank, and we try to look to them for sort of future projections. So strict border control and travel restrictions may hamper intentions to travel, and slow vaccine rollout in Europe also paints a dismal outlook for travel this year. Forecasts of 700,000 tourist arrivals look increasingly optimistic. So here you see there was a 76% drop in tourism between 2019 2020, and we're hoping for like a 30-40% increase this year, but then a 100% increase in the years after. And I would assume that Mexico is looking at such drastic numbers as well post-COVID. Iceland exhibited, so now we're going to go a little bit into the current account. Iceland exhibited a current account surplus in 2020 for the 12th year in a row. Now here we're talking about sort of government finances and the total economy. This is in contrast with most of the recorded history, which has been characterized by persistent deficits, reflecting stronger fundamentals. The national income product has also turned positive. This has helped make room for effective COVID response. Basically, Iceland has been not indebting itself since the financial crisis, and we've been able to push down some of our foreign loans, and our net foreign assets have been going up. But of course, COVID changed all of this, and Iceland's net international investment position, which is the NIIP, is quite good. I think I have reached sort of the 40-minute that I was given to explain to you things about the Icelandic economy, and we're here, and so I'm just going to stop here, where we're looking at the government position in terms of indebtedness, which of course has exploded during COVID, and take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Silverson. Now we start with the Q&A section, as you mentioned. So I'm going to read some of the questions that the participants made. They ask, do people from Iceland have interest in Mexico, talking about tourism, business, and if Iceland receive a big amount of immigrants? If so, from which country?
Okay, we have Association of Mexicanos en Islandia. I'm actually a member of the Facebook group, and I still have not been able to show up for any of their events, even though I want to go every single time. But yes, so I believe sort of the immigration history of Iceland is only about 20 or 30 years. So of course we are on the periphery of Europe, and we are basically also on the periphery of the habitable world, because our country actually touches the Arctic Circle. But we have this warm ocean current that goes past the island, so our island is quite comfortable in summer and the winters are not too bad. So we like to say that we have cool summers but warm winters. So historically there has not been a lot of migration coming into Iceland, but during the financial boom before 2008, and then during especially the tourism booms ever since, immigration into this country has been growing steadily. It started with people from Thailand, but now by far the largest immigration group is people from Poland. So Polish people would be the largest immigrant group in Iceland, and the second one would be people from Lithuania. This is very common throughout Europe. Polish people are very smart at traveling through Europe and working for 5 or 10 years in different European countries and saving up and buying property back in their home countries. So this is the trend of immigration into Iceland, and because of the political situation in Venezuela, we're actually having quite a lot of Venezuelans coming to Iceland at the moment, and I believe you definitely have the same in Mexico.
Okay, the next question is, do you think a trade agreement between Iceland and Latin American countries will be beneficial?
Yes, I think it would be beneficial, and I think there have actually been discussions between Mexico and Iceland about the free trade agreement. And of course, Iceland and Mexico, we cooperate within the framework of OECD, and we're both open free market economies. But here it comes back. So I actually wrote my master's thesis about free trade agreements. And there's just one thing that people have to remember when you make a free trade agreement, is that you need to have transport. So I compared the free trade agreement between Iceland and China and New Zealand. And Iceland and New Zealand are in a way very similar economies. They're both island economies with a lot of, let's say, basic production of agricultural products and food and fisheries and things like this. But it was almost an impossible comparison because there was no direct transport. So if I were the Minister of Commerce of Mexico, I would much rather focus on a free trade agreement with, let's say, Korea, where you will have direct transport between Mexico and South Korea, than Mexico and Iceland. And I think for all of the young students who have joined us here today is that you always have to constantly ask yourself when you're looking at economic opportunities, to look at the simple practical facilitators that facilitate the opportunity that you're analyzing. It is very easy to find data and to find transport links. And so don't try to grow trade between Mexico and Malawi if there's no direct transport. But if you find out that there is direct transport between Mexico and South Africa, the country, for example, then there you may have a genuine opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And this question is it true that there is a government project for citizens to exchange their cars for Teslas?
No, that's not true. But in Norway, it is almost true. So what happened in Norway is that the government, they wanted to speed up what we don't call it change the cars, we call it the energy shift. So it's basically 10 years ago, nobody would have ever imagined that Icelanders would actively start selling their gasoline and diesel engine cars in order to get electric cars. But in Norway, what they did is the government wanted to contribute to the Paris Climate Agreement really fast. So I think they reduced the tax on electric vehicles to almost nothing. So if you would go and buy a Mercedes that has a diesel engine, you would have to pay tax. But if you go buy a Tesla, you would have to pay no tax, or only 50% of the tax. And so the people who were smart, they just all went and bought Teslas. So Tesla couldn't produce enough cars for Norway for all the people who wanted to buy Teslas. And so when the cars went into the second-hand market, the Teslas were competing with cars that were being sold with full tax. So the people who were able to buy them without tax could sell them at a much higher price. So I believe the electric car use in Norway already is about 50%, but in Iceland it's about maybe 10% now, not even. I have a hybrid car. I have a hybrid Mitsubishi, but I can tell you one thing. I went on summer holiday to Poland this summer, and I went to this really popular tourism destination, and I saw a Tesla Jeep, you know, like the really expensive one, in the color orange. And I was like, wow, does some person in Poland have an orange Tesla Jeep? And so I walked and have a look at it, and guess which the license plate number was? It was from Norway, of course. So Tesla is such a good car that they could drive it all the way from Norway down to Poland, probably about 3,000 kilometers, just charging it along the way. So that's the government supporting people to buy Teslas. That's in Norway.
Okay, thank you. And in your opinion, what is the greatest difference and the greatest similarity between the Mexican and Icelandic economies?
There's not a lot of well, I think U.S. dependence would be the greatest similarity. So of course the Mexican economy is very dependent on the U.S. economy for export and cooperation, and the Icelandic economy is very much dependent on the U.S. economy for export and cooperation. We had U.S. Air Force Base here for 40 years, but otherwise the similarities are not very great. For example, of course, Mexico is famous for its hard-working work ethic and good production industries and things like this. Icelandic people are also famous for like a hard-working work ethic, but we don't really produce so many things. Yeah, so those would be my answer to that question.
Okay, and what is the best season to visit Iceland?
Well, of course, the summer is the best season to visit Iceland if you want to travel around the island. But so I used to promote tourism to Chinese tourists when I worked at the embassy in Beijing. But I always tell people to try and come visit here in September or October, because then the weather is still good enough, but you can see the northern lights or the aurora borealis, which of course is extremely beautiful. And then you also have less tourism. So you'll be able to enjoy the beautiful natural sites like the geysers and the waterfalls more exclusively by yourself. And I encourage all of you to come and visit Iceland. It's quite a unique experience, and if you organize it well, and you have affordable accommodation option, you spend some good time, then you will have a great time here. I always say to people, Iceland is not the kind of country you can come and visit for just a week. You have to come for 2 or 3 weeks. But then in Mexico, you have a different problem. You cannot come for 2 or 3 weeks. You have to go for 2 or 3 months, right?
How is the international students live in Iceland?
So the University of Iceland has about 13,000 students. I heard that your faculty had 16,000 students, which makes UNAM, of course, a huge university, but we would be called, like in Europe, a medium-sized university. And we have about 1,500 foreign students, and most foreign student population is Filipinos. They come here to work. So Iceland is very open to Filipino workers because they often work in the health industry, and we like to have people come to work in our health industry because we lack people there. The second one is actually US people, and US people come to study in Iceland because it's more affordable often for them than study in the US, and it's also people maybe trying to avoid some social problems in the US. They come to Iceland and to Europe to study. And then we have Germans who come here for adventure, and they mostly just live in student dormitories at the university, or they rent rooms close to the university, and a lot of them work. So if you have a student visa in Iceland, you can work about 16 hours per week. So people support themselves through a mixture of their savings and work while in Iceland. So it's not this kind of like you're on campus having fun all the time, and not students here, they work hard.
Any advice to do business with Iceland companies?
Well, the thing is, what is very interesting about Iceland, and I think what a lot of your students can learn from when it comes to Iceland, and hopefully they understood from my talk that, of course, it's just important to specialize yourself in the industry that you start working for when you graduate. And what has been really successful in Iceland is tourism, but that's of course that's hard work, and those who are able to build up big companies in tourism, they still have to work very, very hard. What Iceland has also been successful is in terms of creating more value out of our food production. So let's say that in 10 years ago, we caught 1 million tons of fish. We sold those 1 million tons of fish onwards for $10 million. But what we've been trying really hard is to increase the value of everything we catch in the fishing industry by cutting the fish better, using side products to make surimi, or like these fake crab and things like this, to try and create more value. So we have a lot of companies in Iceland that are dedicated to innovation in food industry and in pharmaceutical industry, because that's where you can take older products that already exist and improve their value. And of course, in Mexico, you should have opportunities like this everywhere, because Mexico is a big food producing country. So, for example, industries like earthworms, using earthworms for protein production or for animal feed. These kinds of industries are very exciting going forward. And also the pharmaceutical industry is quite good in Iceland. So I did not mention that during my speech, but back in the past, we've had quite a few pharmaceutical companies who have been very successful, and the business model that they operate on is to find medicines that are about to lose the patent. So, for example, when they discover a really powerful medicine for cancer or for some diseases in US or in Switzerland or in UK or Germany, where they have the big laboratories, they only get the patent for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. So there were few Icelandic pharmaceutical companies that specialized in developing the medicine when the patent was about to become expired, and the day the patent become expired, they are ready to distribute all over the world. So if there are any students here that want to do business with Iceland or learn from like the Icelandic economic miracle, which is actually true, the economic development in this country in the last 30 years has been incredible. Read about the pharmaceutical companies and see the smart things that they did.
We have a couple of questions left, but unfortunately we're run out of time. Therefore, I want to thank you first, and then I'm gonna read the certificate of recognition that our faculty.
Mi estimado maestro Alberto, si nos ayuda con el certificado, por favor.
La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, Facultad de Contaduría y Administración, otorga el presente reconocimiento a Haflidy Severson por su destacada participación como ponente en la conferencia Economic Structure and Sustainability of Iceland, impartida el 24 de septiembre de 2021 en el marco del primer Festival Internacional Facultad de Contaduría y Administración, UNAM. Por mi raza hablaré el espíritu, ciudad universitaria, Ciudad de México, septiembre de 2021, y firma el maestro Tomás Humberto Rubio Pérez, director de esta facultad. I can only thank you guys for your presence today, and Mr. Severson for having shared this useful information with us. And I invite you to join the rest of the activities of this festival. And I think that's all, and have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Haflidy. Thank you, Professor Brigitte.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
See you.